Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Mythrax on Mythic in Uldir.
This penultimate boss is likely to be your first real test within the instance. It is, however, a free kill if your raid can easily dodge beams and have a good understanding of where to position and at what point. This encounter on Mythic has one new additional mechanic that really impacts Phase 1 and a few small changes that largely impact Phase 2. But before talking about Phase 2, let's start off by talking about the beginning of the fight in Phase 1.
So for the most part it's the same as Heroic, except you'll definitely want to start with tanking the boss in the middle of the room if you wasn't already. Tanks still need to taunt off each other after every Essence Shear cast, and throughout the fight you'll constantly want to keep dropping your Annihilation Stacks. Players with Imminent Ruin debuffs still want to move far away from the raid, and Oblivion Spheres will still spawn, however they only spawn on ranged players now. You'll want to break them every time the raid is above 60 to 70% health, using things like Death Grips and knockbacks from things like Ring of Peace. The break on Mythic deals a large amount of damage, so it's vital that ranged players are always spread whenever an orb is due to spawn. Having multiple players broke at the same time can be incredibly dangerous, so you need to avoid it at all costs. The boss will also still cast his blast, just keep an eye on which way he's facing to avoid taking the damage and also the additional stacks of Annihilation. What's new in this phase, however, is the add. On a timer, the boss will cast Living Weapon on a random player. This is the spawn location of the add. The add is completely immobile, so this spawn location is incredibly important. You need to keep an eye on timers and move under the boss before the cast starts. This cast never overlaps with any other ability to the exact second, so you always have time to move in, spawn the add, then move immediately back out again to deal with either your ruin debuffs or spread for spheres. When the add spawns, it will deal damage to anyone within its animation, so make sure you keep away until it actually arrives. Now the Zalziak's add has two casts. Void Echoes deals a burst of damage to the entire raid. Now this damage is increased by 50% each time it is cast. If the add casts this ability 3 times, unless the raid is at full health, it's pretty much a wipe. As a result, you need to get rid of this guy before that point by getting him to 50% health, at which point he'll leave. Whilst progressing the boss in the early weeks of Uldir, we actually set up certain DPS players to save cooldowns for either the first or second add, just to make sure that third cast would never happen. Consider doing the same for your raid if you're consistently struggling. Also, just like the boss, the add will also cast an Obliteration Beam, dodge it just like you have been with the boss. Now whilst this add is up, the boss will still continue to deal damage to the raid through spheres and imminent ruins. If you combine that with the damage from the Void Echoes cast from the add, it gets pretty nasty. We have healing cooldowns assigned to cover both adds you see during phase 1 every single time just to make it safe. You can find an example of our cooldowns and timings in a Google Doc in the description of this video, which you can copy and adjust from. Now as implied, you should only ever get 2 adds spawn per phase 1, but if you're too slow you will get a third. Just know if you transition while an add is up, it'll actually just despawn, so it's not necessarily a wipe if you get that third add, it's just not ideal, you're just being too slow. Also, one thing that might help you kill the second add a little bit faster, if you redot the add just before it gets to 50% health and leaves, it will continue to take damage, so when it does return, it will be less than 100% health, it will be around 95%, which will help you kill that second one a little bit quicker.
Last thing to mention is the Annihilation Stacks. If your entire raid plays perfectly, you shouldn't really have to soak a single orb. Ideally, you'll be leaving every single one for the tanks and a few melee players, as they're going to need them in the long run. Now when you do get the boss to 66%, he'll transition. Before we show you how phase 2 plays out, let's just explain a few new changes. 1. The Destroyers add aura that reduces the damage they take whenever they're too close to each other is now 60 yards rather than 40. This basically requires you to tank them on opposite sides of the room from each other. And 2, there is 2 beams being fired around the room from Zalziak's instead of just 1 from the boss. This causes issues with the raid being split around the room, so instead we have everyone stacked on top of 2 set locations and you just alternate between them, whilst you have 1 tank all by himself on the other side of the room. Now the adds will still be casting Void Volley, and this hurts a shit ton on Mythic. The one that of course is by the raid is fine, you have all of the interrupts in the world. It's the one that's on the tank on the opposite side, that's the scary one because they only have a single person to interrupt it, which by themselves is only going to cover 2 of the 4 casts you need interrupting. However, if you have 2 Warlocks in the raid, they can simply cover the other interrupts using their Fellhound's interrupt. So as you transition into this phase, have those 2 Warlock pets stay on that side of the room, and they can help interrupt the add as part of a rotation. If you do not have the Warlocks, you instead will just need to outheal the damage, which isn't ideal, but you can do it. Now the tank on the opposite side of the room being so far away also won't be receiving any direct healing from your healers, so the tank best for this job is someone like a DK or a Paladin. Monks can do a pretty good job as well. Just make sure that as you enter the phase, you have very little stacks and have all of your cooldowns ready so that you can survive whilst the raid kills the other add. Also to note in this phase, the ad near the raid is taunted on a rotation by melee DPS to help keep Annihilation Stacks low on that tank. Whilst this isn't mandatory, it really does help a lot, especially towards the end of the fight. Warriors are best for this job as they can die by the sword and not get hit by any accidental melee hits. Other melees can take this, but they may need externals to make it safe.
So let's show the transition from phase 1. The boss will move towards Gahun's room and begin to cast Zalziak's Awakening. Keep spread while it's cast and immediately free the sphered player. We then all move to the first marker with one tank whilst the other tank moves to the other side of the room with the other ad. You can pick up a few orbs as you're running over here, but typically you want to leave the majority of them. Keep a close eye on the beam timer and have the entire raid move as one group as it's cast. When moving towards the other marker, you'll notice it's on top of a growth coming out of the wall. This is really important. By jumping and standing on top of this whilst the Vision of Madness ads spawn, it causes them all to spawn stacked so they can be quickly killed off. The next beam comes in and then we move back to the original location, as at this point you'll want the first ad to be dead just before the next beam comes in. If you need certain DPS to hold cooldowns just for this ad, then you should do. The moment the ad is dead, the far side tank should then run over with the other ad. You should life grip the tank here just to speed it up. You'll then have the next beam, and you'll need to move back towards the growth spot and begin to kill off the next ad. You'll then get another beam, you need to move back to the original marker, and it's at this point you'll have around 5 seconds to kill the final ad and all of the visions before phase 1 begins again. At this point, tanks should go and soak any remaining orbs left within the room. As phase 1 begins again, you'll start to get mechanics pretty quickly, with a sphere and ruin debuffs followed by the first ad spawn all within quick succession, and from there the fight just repeats. Once you get the boss to 33%, you'll have another phase 2, simply repeat what you did in the first phase, and then eventually you'll get the boss into his final phase 1. At this point, no one in the raid should have more than 20 stacks, apart from maybe your tanks if they haven't had a good time and your phase 1s have taken too long and they've taken too many additional Essence Shear casts, but ultimately if you play perfect, no one in your raid should have more than 20, and your tank should have none. You'll want to play this last phase out just like you have with all the others, but just keep in mind the stacks, which means people are going to drop lower than normal, especially when the ads are up and you're breaking spheres at the exact same time. Some guilds opt not to break any spheres during this last phase, which is perfectly fine I guess, but there are various things that will randomly break people from spheres like laser matrix and trinket effects, and you have to expect that that's going to happen during your progression. So we do recommend to continue breaking people like normal. Healers just have to be shit hot at keeping everyone topped. Now for the first ad that spawns in this phase, we bloodlust just to get him down as soon as possible, and on more recent kills we've completely ignored the second ad and just nuked down the boss. Now this is unlikely to be viable on the first kill, you probably will need to kill that second ad, just know that it's possible and you might not need to. And that's more or less everything you need to know for this encounter. Just keep in mind when progressing this boss, it's all about positioning. Once you've got used to phase 1 and all the positioning during phase 1 and you've got into a position where multiple people aren't being sphered, and once healers have got their cooldowns down, all you need to do is get used to that phase 2 positioning and moving from one side to another, whilst making sure that you actually have good damage on those ads. As soon as you've gone through one set of phase 1 and one set of phase 2, you've essentially just finished the fight. You just need to repeat it one more time and you should be good.
Now if you'd like to know more about this encounter with detailed tooltips or just simply something there just to refresh your mind during the raid, then do go check out our written guides over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description below. A huge thanks to all of our supporters over on Patreon. Thank you so much for your continued support, and we'll see you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.